Welcome back viewers, ladies, gentlemen, non-binaries and anyone with ears or other sound detection organs. Hope you enjoy. We are continuing with Going Native, written by Uncle Sealing. Going Native, Chapter 16. Waking up was unpleasant, to say the least. Stace's mouth was filled with sour taste and his eyes felt glued shut. He attempted to reach up with his right arm, only for a shooting pain across his shoulder and chest to convince him that that wasn't going to work. After a long groan, he switched hands and tried to scrape the grit out of his eyes. Finally, he managed to get them open and the room slowly resolved into the familiar cabin that had been his life for so long. As the cabin came into focus, the view was obscured by two faces staring at him from only inches away, purple skin and black sclera and pointed tusks. Stace's dry throat let out a rasp of surprise and he tried to scoot back in a panic, but trying to lift his weight with his elbows only resulted in more pain and his arms sliding out from under him. The back of Stace's head bounced off the rough wooden floor and his mouth was flooded with the taste of copper as his molars clipped the side of his tongue. Finally, his rattled brain started to put things back together. Stace let out a strangled cough and raised his left hand, forestalling any help from his two alien companions. He tried to speak, but his mouth and throat were too dry, even with the blood from his bitten tongue. Ian was pointing at his mouth in a panic and the two were talking in that odd language of theirs. A quick taking a drink motion with Stace's one good arm and both of the Shilvati seemed to calm down. "Are you okay? Why are you bleeding?" Elora seemed almost panicked as Stace gulped down water from a clay cup. After a few rough coughs, he was finally able to talk with a raspy voice. "Bit my tongue." Elora relayed this to Ian while Stace continued to drink until the cup was dry. Finally, he dropped the cup and tried to sit up. "How long have I been out?" "Almost 2 days." Stace grimaced. "How bad is the caribou?" "If they had left that carcass for days." Elora looked perplexed at the question. "It's all packed in snow. Ian disassembled it and we figured as long as we kept it cold you could help us as soon as you woke up." Stace let out a long breath. "Oh, thank God. If they did a good job and weren't too squeamish, there was probably 50 kilos of meat there. That should keep everyone alive long enough for him to get the two of them trained and prepared for the rest of the winter. Then he would be done." Sitting up turned out to be a team effort, but soon enough Stace was able to at least look around. He was shirtless and, as he was surprised to notice, pantless. Continuing the downward trek, he noticed that his feet were wrapped in bandages. Fresh bandages. Well, this was going to be awkward. The two aliens seemed to notice his gaze, and looked at each other with a nod. Apparently the coming confrontation was planned. Elora took a seat on the floor next to him, on his left. Ian did the same on his right. Elora reached an arm around Stace's waist, pulling him close. He flinched a little from the aches and pains of being jostled, but he didn't try to pull away. "You shouldn't be on the floor like this, Elora. You're still healing? Well, we need to discuss something and I can't have you trying to crawl away." As she said it, Ian wrapped an arm around Stace, grabbing him from the other side. He felt trapped, less by their arms than by the conversation he knew was coming. At least the warmth from the pair of aliens snuggling against him seemed to help with the chills he couldn't seem to shake. Stace was silent for a moment before poorly attempting some nonchalance. "So, what would you like to talk about?" "Frostbite." Stace nodded. "I figured it would be something like that. How bad is it?" Elora tried to meet his eyes, but instead Stace's head dropped, looking down at nothing. "It's not ideal." "And why didn't you tell us? Did you think you had to show off? Be the big bad human showing up the poor defenseless aliens? Too tough to be hurt? Grow a pair of tits and give us the truth." Elora was clearly upset, but there wasn't a way around this. It was time to put his cards on the table. So he told her. Ian stared at Ella's slack face, drained of blood in shock. What did he say? Ella. Ella. What did Stace say? Her voice sounded hollow. He said he's dying. The reason he didn't tell us was because we can't do anything about it. The news hit the Shilvati mail like a boot to the teeth. It just didn't make sense. How could he be dying? After a moment of silence, he whispered out a quiet, "How long?" "A week, maybe 2 depending on how well the antibiotics help." "No," Ian locked eyes with the large Marine. "How long has he known?" A few moments of dialogue, and Ella had an answer. He says he's known since before I woke up. It's the frostbite. He doesn't have a way to fix the damage and he knew it would just keep getting worse. Maybe if he took it easy and let it heal or took the time to treat it properly it would be a different story, but instead his dumb ass kept running around trying to help us out. Infection has already set in, so it's just a matter of time. Ian locked eyes with Ella. Both of them had tears in their eyes, but he had enough anger fueling him to keep his voice steady. "Translate for me. I need you to tell him that he's the most infuriating idiot I have met in my entire life, irrespective of species or gender. Tell him that if he's too stupid to live, we are going to take care of him, because he saved our lives without asking, so clearly he's okay with that. Tell him he doesn't have a choice in the matter, so he can either get on the shuttle or get off the landing pad. And tell him that he doesn't have to worry about you because I will personally put my foot up his ass. Tell him." Stace couldn't help but laugh once Ella was done translating Ian's diatribe. This earned him a slap upside the back of his head from the small man, but it didn't stop his sad chuckling. "I appreciate the thought, I really do, but there's nothing to be done. I need to take the next week to make sure you're all prepared for when I'm gone. In fact, we really should get to it." He tried to get up, but the 2 aliens tightened their grip, stopping him from so much as moving. Ella had a pained expression, the dark pools of her eyes shining with moisture. "There really isn't any way to treat it. Short of cutting off my feet?" "Not really." "Would that work?" Ella looked dead serious. Stace thought back to what Ian had said, and immediately grew concerned. "I want you to listen to me very carefully, Ella. We are not going to try it. I am going to teach you how to live out here, and then I am going to die. You 2 will make it back to your people, survive, and maybe name a kid after me." That got a reaction at least, her eyes widening and skin turning flush. "If we try backwards surgery on me, I will end up dead anyway and I'll use up supplies you might need later. Even if I somehow survive, I will be stuck in the cabin and you will have a useless mouth to feed. It's better this way." Ella shook her head, but didn't seem to have a rebuttal. Hopefully that would be the end of it. Stace was tired and there was too much work to do. For a few minutes, the 3 just sat there, Ella and Ian quietly whispering to each other while Stace gathered his strength. Then, after a few more minutes of convincing the pair that he wasn't a porcelain doll, Stace managed to get up to the chair. He was woozy and everything was spinning. His right arm didn't want to cooperate either, hanging uselessly throughout the process. "All right, first lesson is going to be prepping all that meat. We need to get it dried out so we can store it without it spoiling. There is a small smokehouse behind the wood pile. We'll use that for the brunt of the work. Then we can rehydrate it as we need it, or we can use it to make pemmican. Bones we can use to make stocks and stews. Bone marrow is nutritious as well. Did you find the organs in my bag?" Ella nodded at Stace, so he continued. He was impressed, she was actually taking notes on one of the tablets. "Traditionally, you would eat the heart immediately to honor the memory of the kill. That's kind of out the window. Ella shrugged. We already ate it. Aing and I found a recipe using some of the other supplies you have. It was actually really good. The kidneys and liver, we didn't know what to do with. Liver is easy. We want to cook it as little as possible, though. It's a good source of vitamin C, but that gets destroyed in the cooking process. Freezing it and eating it raw would be best. It's probably a good thing you didn't experiment with the kidneys. You have to soak them for a while or they just end up tasting like piss. Stace was unaware that the purple skin of a shilvati could turn green, but the sickly pallor on her face told him that yes, they could. If you're squeamish now, I'd hate to think what you'll look like when we fry up the brain. You're messing with me. Of course not. Tons of calories in brain, it's mostly just fat and water. We're trying to survive here, and that means using as much as we can. The only reason I didn't bring all the guts back was to try to save on weight. Stace could see Ella practically dive on the change in subject. How in the name of the Empress did you manage to carry that back anyway? It was bigger than you. Fireman's carry. As long as you keep the weight centered, you can carry a lot more than your body weight. Hell on the knees and back, though. Stace looked like absolute shit. Ella was honestly surprised he was still alive. She had retrieved his stitching pony, a big clamp thing, apparently a homemade leather working tool, and used some old pants to make a sling for his wrecked arm. Now the human was happily working away, converting a bunch of his old clothing to fit the two of them. He could barely move, was sweating, covered in cuts and bruises, clearly still had a fever, and was probably dying, but he was just chugging along trying to make sure the two shilvati would be ready when his time came. Ella wasn't having it. Aing was doing a great job distracting the human, eliciting help through pantomime as he broke down the meat and prepped it for smoking. He was also making a point of explaining everything he was doing in Shil. Hopefully Stace would pick up some of the language. While his attention was thus divided, Ella was able to do a little work on her own. She wasn't surprised that Stace had medical books, but she was surprised by the number and scope of them. It went past survival medicine, he had historical books, biographies of famous doctors, everything an alien might need to learn how to do. What did he call it? Backwards surgery. Most of the training Ella had received in medicine was emergency trauma management, but she knew a bit about infection and wound care. What she was learning was that bad frostbite was a fantastic place for infection, what the humans called gangrene, to set in. Normal treatment would be removing just the dead tissue and treating with antibiotics, but they had been treating Stace with the antibiotics while he was asleep. There wasn't much left in the medicine cabinet, which meant more aggressive treatment was the only option. His idea of running out the clock while helping them was a noble one, it was true. It was also stupid. The longer they waited, the more supplies they used, the lower his chances of actually surviving. They needed to make a move as soon as possible. With that in mind, Ella inventoried what they had. Scalpels and blades, 2 handles, at least a dozen sterile blades. She didn't know how to put them together, but Aing might know, and if not she could probably make Stace show her. Bandages, 2 individually packaged rolls left. A few flat pack ones. Definitely not enough for an operation, but they could boil some towels or shirts and use those. Sutures, plenty of individually packed needles ready to go in various sizes. Some could dissolve in a body and some needed to be removed manually. Tourniquet, 2 with directions. They were primitive but would be essential. Syringes, 5 individually wrapped and sterilized. Could probably reuse them as long as she only used them for Stace. No idea what human gunk could do in a shilvati or vice versa. Stapler, the medical stapler was a silver steel gun that used packs of sterilized staples. 2 sterilized packs of 35 staples each plus whatever was left in the gun from the last time it was used on her. Iodine, very little left, would definitely be using the rest of it up during the surgery. Honestly, she was surprised there was any left after a decade here, but Stace must have been trying to save it. Ella also took the time to look at the bottles of injectable drugs. Ampicillin, broad-spectrum antibiotic. Enough left for a couple days at the most. Not enough to treat him the way he is now and definitely not enough to handle surgery. Ketorolac-tromethamine, anti-inflammatory and painkiller. Should be useful, and there was plenty. Lidocaine, another painkiller, this one local. Injected in an area to numb it. Definitely going to be using this. And lastly, epinephrine. When Ella looked this one up, she nearly panicked. Why would Stace have a bottle of adrenaline? The same hormone that made humans so tough to fight, the same stuff that was pouring through his veins when he managed to carry a 150-kilo caribou 3 kilometers on foot. It wasn't until she read about the medical uses that she admitted to herself that it probably wasn't some sort of potion to turn Stace into an unkillable monster. Now she just needed to figure out how to use it all. In another life, Stace would have made an excellent tailor. Ian pulled on a set of leather overpants and found that they fit perfectly, not so tight that they would bind against his regular clothes but not so loose that they were distracting. The coat that had been oversized to the point of comedy had been taken in at the shoulders and the sleeves shortened, and Stace had even managed to make one of his rough wool sweaters fit. With this, Ian could leave his, now horribly battered, designer jacket back at the cabin and wear 4 layers on top, undershirt, shirt, sweater, coat, and 4 on the bottom, regular underwear, long underwear, pants, overpants. A new hat with flaps that folded down on the back and sides to block the wind completed the look. Perhaps Ian wouldn't want to be seen in public like this, but at least he would be warm. While he was trying on his new outfit, Stace was doing something with his guns. Ian could hear the tinkle of empty brass cases falling out of the pistol and onto the table, and glancing over revealed only one of 5 that looked unused. Ella had given him a basic description of the principle behind the human firearms, and while he found the whole idea of holding tiny explosions faintly ridiculous, the fact that the caribou had gone down with only 1 shot drove home the fact that primitive did not mean the same thing as ineffective. Stace solemnly reloaded the huge pistol and slid it into the leather holster. Stace and Ella both joined Ian in getting prepped for an excursion outside. The human had definitely been struggling with using his right arm and needed Ella's help just to put on his coat. Between that and Ella's continued recovery, it looked like Ian would have to do the heavy lifting. Even though it was only early afternoon, the sun was setting as the trio made their way outside. Everything was still and quiet, but Ian couldn't shake the feeling of eyes looking at him from all sides. Stace started talking as he brushed the snow off of the smoker with one gloved hand. It was essentially 2 boxes attached to each other, one just big enough that Ian thought he could fit in it and the other half the size. Stace says we build a fire in the small box and the smoke gets transferred to the large box. It will take most of a day for the meat to dry out and absorb the smoke, which will help stop it from spoiling. We are making something called jerky. As Ella spoke, Stace pulled wooden plugs out of some vent holes in the top of the large box and the side of the small box. After unlatching the 2 boxes, the insides were revealed. The small box was lined with clay and the bottom was dug deep into the ground to make a fire pit, while the larger box had rows of poles arranged horizontally with shining steel hooks hanging from them. Apparently Stace had known from the beginning that he was going to make something like this and had packed accordingly. Under the human's direction, Ian and Ella were able to quickly fill the entire smoke chamber with thin strips of caribou meat. Getting the fire started was quite a bit harder. You're a big bad marine and you don't know how to start a fire. Of course I can start a fire. I just don't want to use one of our pistol charges to do it. You can't start a fire without shooting it. How else would I do it? I don't have a lighter on me. There's a magnifying glass in Stace's dresser, but it's too dark for that. The argument was interrupted when Stace reappeared, having just gone inside while the two argued and grabbed a lit piece of wood from the fireplace. He handed it over to Elora and then crouched down with a grunt of pain before stacking the wood in a careful lattice pattern one-handed. He put some fine shavings in the bottom with some thin sticks, then motioned for Elora to light it. He says to be careful to keep the fire the correct size. If it gets too big it will ruin the meat. Too small and the meat won't dry properly. We should check the fire every couple of hours and make sure to keep both chambers closed. By tomorrow we should have meat we can store long term. Ian nodded. Seems simple enough. What do we do if something tries to take our food while it's out here? The latches on the two chambers were heavy duty and used pegs that slid into slots, but anything determined enough could probably get in. After a couple comments in human speak, Elora grinned with her reply. If it doesn't run away when we check on it, we add it to the smoker. End of chapter. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss any episode and do all the other YouTube stuff, visit and support the author, and I'll see you next time. If you didn't enjoy, comment on what I can do better. And as usual, have a wonderful day.